Welcome back to Sputnik. It has long been my contention that the liberalisation of the left, which I date to the rise of so-called Eurocommunism in the early 1980s, began a long retreat into impotence and irrelevance. The rise of the far right in France, in the US, and indeed in Britain is a direct consequence of that retreat of the left.
A new book explores this thesis, which is gaining considerable traction. The book is The Rise of the Right, English Nationalism and the Transformation of Working-Class Politics. And one of its co-authors joins us now.
He is Professor Steve Hall of the University of Teesside, and he's most welcome on board the Sputnik.
Thanks.
As my thesis and your thesis has a lot of overlap, we can kind of park it and encourage people to buy and read the book. I want to ask, if you like, a theoretical question first. This descent, retreat, call it what you will, into liberalism by the left, it's a result, isn't it, of a collapse of confidence in the idea of an alternative system to the capitalist system under which we live.
I think that's a good basis. I think think of it as a river with many tributaries. Think of the middle-class liberal takeover of the left at various points in British history. 1905, the Labour Party taken over by Fabians, who wrote the script for the Labour Party. The working class voice was basically suffocated from that point onwards. The working class tend to be rather socially conservative, so they were a fundamental target of the liberalisation. Another point, Stuart Hall's introduction to the New Left Review in 1960. We can't have state politics, we can't have class politics. Look out to culture, youth subculture, and just look for little bits of resistance where we can find. And hopefully this rainbow alliance will magically appear in the future. Well, it didn't. Here we are, with a working class without no confidence, no voice and no proper representation. Eurocommunism again, which grew out of was influenced by the American counterculture. The American counterculture was never a left-wing movement. It was a libertarian movement. Yes. It was about personal liberation. Yeah, yes, you know, smoke as much weed as you possibly can and free love. It was Easy Rider, I suppose, was the icon of the counterculture. It had nothing to do with the left. So gradually the left was eaten away by various liberal forces and turned into a branch of liberalism.
The Californication of the left, I used to call it. But this Californication has led to an obsessive concentration on issues of gender, sexuality, orientation, the transsectional nature of some of these things. You get my drift. And we end up a left that's obsessed with safe spaces and kicking people off university platforms, none of which does much to attract support amongst the working class.
No, of course, the great political road to freedom, the gender-neutral toilet. I mean, you know, which we now. I'm sure someone will have, you know, a whole course.
Or people having babies no longer being allowed to call mothers.
Whatever. Yes, none of this interested the working class. The working class are interested in jobs. They're interested in security and stability. They were slightly socially conservative, and okay, there were residues of sexism, racism, homophobia in the working class, but that was something to work on. These were cultural issues, had nothing to do with politics. Culture and politics became intertwined. French theorist Jean Baudrillard called this transpartition. We're going from one thing to another and just melding them together. All of a sudden, politics became culture, culture became politics, and nobody knew what was going on. So the working class completely lost confidence. They looked in sort of consternation at this sort of thing. I remember being on a Democracy Day watch I think it was 1984 or 5, and Ken Livingstone as Great London Council was about to go down the Swanee. And I remember going past a bunch of mime artists, and they were very clever, and it was very nice. And a bunch of firemen walking past the mime artists and thinking, that's very nice, but what is it? What are they going on about?
It's art.
It's art, yes. And we all need art, and you know, we all need ways of communicating, but this had nothing to do then, the cleavage between the middle-class liberal left and the working-class left, so it hit me in the face that day, walking past.
The coalition that was broadly described as the left, let's call it the Labour Party, the Labour movement, it did survive until the 80s, I knew both Harold Wilson and James Callaghan very well. Both of them were socially conservative people, but who knew, especially Wilson, that you needed to, as it were, add bits on to the working class. You had to add on friendly intellectuals, friendly upper-class people, friendly single-issue people, and so on, to make a coalition that could win power. Mr. Callaghan was much more socially conservative than Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
But he still had a conception that the Labour movement needed to be based on and centred with the working class. That without the working class, the trade unions, all the rest was just a tray of sand blowing in the wind. It died, didn't it, with the rise of Eurocommunism, Marxism today, their influence on Neil Kinnock. And for me, it's kind of all been downhill since. And even Jeremy Corbyn, my old friend, hasn't really arrested that drift yet, at least.
No, he hasn't. Jeremy's a nice chap, and I rejoined the Labour Party to vote for him. I left in '83 when Kinnock came on the scene. I was very keen on Tony Benn and others at the time. But I think what happened was that this strange beast that the American political philosopher Nancy Fraser calls neoliberal progressivism happened. Well, all of these cultural issues were taken up by people who were essentially neoliberals. They were Thatcherites, the Reaganites. And they were just as good at presenting these cultural issues as the left. Why not? Because these people who are gay, people who are women, have all sorts of political shades. You know, they're not all left-wingers. So the whole thing was upended. You know, it raced off on a tangent and it became a cultural movement. Eurocommunism certainly helped, but I think the most powerful force at that time was what Fraser calls neoliberal progressivism. And you now have the Women's March in the USA the other day, which was a fantastic display of protest. But really, look at who we got: Madonna and Ashley Judd and these people. They're on the left. They have nothing to do with the working class. And it's all of a sudden it's been hijacked by...
Well, the working class voted for Trump because he promised them he might not deliver, of course, probably won't deliver, but he promised them their jobs back.
Oh, jobs, yes.
The tweet of the year was sent to me the other day by someone who said, I'm an Iraqi, and it's reassuring to know that those who destroyed my country were completely against sexism and racism.
Exactly.
And that's where we ended.
It's nice to know Hillary's bombs are feminist bombs.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Hillary Clinton, the bomber, Barack Obama, the bomber, they were really cool on issues of race and sexuality, except for the people of all sexes, races and orientations that they were killing with their bombs.
If they're over there, I often wondered why the streets weren't full of protesters when Hillary Clinton, I don't know if you saw this, was filmed celebrating the death of Gaddafi. He was a human being. You know, whatever anyone thinks of him. And he was brutally murdered. And what was it? We came,
she said, we saw, he died. And how she laughed.
It was quite horrific.
It is an extraordinary business. Where does it all end, Professor? Is the left gone for good? Are we looking at a future of Le Pen's and UKIP's and Trump's and Wilders and the AfD in Germany and so on? Or is it possible for the left, in your view, from your phenomenal amount of research that's gone into this book, for the left to be reconstructed, rebuilt?
People accuse us of being bleak. We've been writing about this for 20 years. This is the first trade publications getting in the public eye, selling very well. There's hope. And I voted for Corbyn. It's like, you know, what I like about you is your girlfriend. What I like with Corbyn is McDonald and his National Investment Bank and regional investment banks. If we can start talking sense again, if we can start talking about investment, because don't forget that this problem is a problem of globalisation. Free finance capital can invest wherever he wants. It doesn't have to invest in the north of England or in the Rust Belt in America. That's the basis of the whole problem. What Yanis Varoufakis called the reversal of the global flows of trade and capital. Once we made over here and sold over there, now it's the other way around. And we borrow the money from them to buy the stuff they're making. It's crazy. And then this, you know, it's nuts. It's unsustainable. If we can invest in places, if we can start speaking to the working class like we care about them, and if this can be manifested in real jobs, in hope for the future. The working class always ran on hope. It's the children. Will the children do better than me? My dad was in a mining industry. He fixed steam engines, and he was made redundant. And I got steelworks for half the wages. But he thought, I wonder if I'm going to do better, or just at least just as well. But that's now not happening. It's, you know, we're worried about the next generation.
Oh, no, our children, and by the grace of God, I have a lot of young children.
Yeah.
They are by no means guaranteed
right.
a life as good as mine. Maybe because they're mine, they'll do a little bit better. But if I were an industrial worker, as my father was, it was an axiom that I was going to do better than he did. It's no longer the case.
Absolutely.
We need to get back to a program of mass council house building, at least social housing, jobs at fair wages and trade union representation for everybody.
But what sort of jobs, George? What the neoliberals said in the 80s was all of a sudden we're going to take these mass industrial workers and they're all going to become computer programmers, or they're all going to sell each other haircuts.
Sell each other ice cream.
Yeah, whatever. It didn't work. It was nuts. How could anyone think for 1 minute that a service economy is going to replace all of those steady, secure industrial jobs, especially up north where I came from? Come on, Parsons Engineering.
From my point of view, Brexit, whilst necessary, it's not sufficient, but it is necessary, allows the possibility of rebuilding our manufacturing industry in a way that the EU simply would have forbidden.
Absolutely.
Would have been illegal.
And possibly supported by a universal basic income as a temporary stopgap to lift people out of this poverty and despair. Because some of the places up in the old County Durham coalfield where I was born, you know, they've been falling to bits for 30 years. So if we can do that, if they're serious about this, the National Investment Bank, the regional investment banks, then we might just be able to do something. Because there, we're not as bleak as everyone says we are. We do have a little bit of hope. But I'm not holding my breath, and I'll leave the Labour Party as soon as it doesn't happen.
Professor Hall, it's a rare pleasure talking to you, and everyone should buy that book.